Welcome to Unsheathed 106. In today's episode, we will introduce the previous questions we answered in 006, which was August 27th, 2009. We are fortunate enough to have one of our guest hosts back, not Tube. Super excited about that. So we'll answer the two questions. We'll re-answer the two questions from the original episode. Plus, we have two new questions that came in from the Unsheathed community at the Sofawolf Academy.
You too can be part of the Sofawolf Academy community by just going to some website and signing up, right?
That's correct. If you go to some website and sign up, you'll become part of the Sofawolf Academy and the Unsheathed community.
Cool.
Being part of the Unsheathed community does not give you a privilege to unsheath.
You have to discover that privilege for yourself.
It's one of the badges.
Hi, I'm Kyell Gold, by the way.
Look at the effort we go through to recreate the magic of what came before.
Fortunately, the magic was just us sitting in a room, so it's not that hard to recreate.
The Sangioveses of yesteryear have been replaced with the Zinfandels of today.
Où sont les sangria d'antan?
Hi, I'm K.M. Hirosaki. I've been turned back into your wine-drinking otter. I made it through the first couple of episodes without that being what I was doing, and now I'm back to my old tricks.
His fur is a nice burgundy color.
I think I was plying people with sangria in 006 back in 2009.
That's true.
006 is the last episode that was not uploaded to the podcast feed because we had audio issues with it. So
It was lost media.
Lost media. So
Now it's found media. Restored media.
Kind of. Anyway, welcome, Not Tube.
I'm still not Tube. I will never be Tube. Please stop calling me Tube.
I haven't called you Tube in years.
If only I could say that about everyone.
Not to your face.
Wow.
Wait, who calls you Tube?
It's
The dark
delightful
streets.
to have you back. Thank you. You were also present on our episode number 6. We had some delightful, sparkling conversation to go with the sparkling sangria.
We did.
And I guess, should we talk about things we're doing now? Sorry, I kind of jumped in and started doing things. You usually guide us through this first
is
part
great.
of the episode.
I'm appreciating the well-crafting wordplay of the sparkling sangria. I'm still enjoying that part with the sparkling conversation that is about to be before us. I don't really have any updates since our last episode. We recorded about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
We're just kind of going through summer. We've got busy projects. Might have some stuff to announce the next episode, maybe about another 2 weeks.
Yeah. For those of you who are just discovering us during the now timeline, there haven't been any huge developments from us, although we will be talking about developments over the last 15 years, I'm sure.
I will say one thing changed a little bit that people might be interested in, which is somebody messaged me about one of my projects that is sitting in the complete draft, but I'm not doing anything with it until I have time and clearing out of other projects. But because of that, it sort of falls between the cracks of things I'm talking about in the newsletter, which are things that are actively being worked on to come out soon and projects I'm actively writing a first draft of. So there's this kind of middle tranche of products I hate calling them products, middle tranche of things that I'm working on that don't get talked about. So as a result of that, I reformatted that section of my newsletter to include everything that is in any stage of being worked on. So if you sign up for my newsletter, kyellgold.substack.com, you once a month will get updates on all the projects so that you can see where everything is in the queue. As a secondary result of that, Kit over there suggested that we get a Trello board, and then I remembered, I made a Trello board for my writing projects. I just haven't looked at it in a year. So I dug that up and spent an afternoon updating it and moving things into the done category, looking at projects that were going to happen in the future and saying, I don't remember what that is. Or I've already started working on that one, which was nice. So now I have a Trello board that Kit can look at all of the projects that I'm working on. The newsletter is more informative now than ever before. That's my
you
big
could glimpse
update.
the Trello board, or you could follow the fox into the Substack. I don't know. I know which one appeals more to me.
Well, the Trello board's not public, so.
God damn it. So yeah, welcome back to us.
And Peggy.
Man, that's a reference that came and went in between.
No one would
when
have
we
gotten
last
that
recorded
2009.
these. No, that's true.
I don't think I got it now.
It's from Hamilton.
Ah,
Yeah. Which I hear is cringe among the young folks these days.
oh, is it already?
Oh yeah,
to
they've
that?
Yeah.
turned on it.
Yeah.
Oh, that took about 6 years. When did it come out? 6 years
Oh
ago?
god,
7
no, it
years
was
ago?
longer ago than that.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Think about how long ago the pre-COVID world was, Kit, and I know I hate it too. Don't worry.
We saw
A
it.
decade ago, I guess.
We saw it in
Yeah.
2016.
Yeah, and I remember
In
like
January.
2016 wasn't that when like Mike Pence tried to go to it and the whole
Yeah.
audience booed him.
Like Hamilton was a musical. It was definitely written when people still had hope.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe it'll come back now.
Oh, that's true.
Why have the youth turned on it?
I think that Lin-Manuel Miranda was just a little too earnest in his Broadway schmaltz in a way that like young people don't get, and like I don't know,
It is very earnest, which is one of the things that I kind of like about it.
right?
Yeah, and I don't know. I think people are still into sincerity, but there's a way in which I think it doesn't seem earnest to people now, which is that one of the criticisms of a lot of Broadway musicals, I think it was maybe Lindsay Ellis who was talking about this way back when, is that they always are about this like this young upstart group that's against the system, but in reality, Broadway musicals are one of the most big money overproduced like things that you can make. So it's impossible to have a show about fighting the system on Broadway and have it be successful and popular.
That's why
because-
the Rent lottery was probably so popular back when that was a thing. Like,
He did start Hamilton off Broadway, though.
yeah, I know,
So-
but still, but once it gets to Broadway, it's not
Right.
that anymore.
Right. I talked to someone recently who is not one of the youngs, but also I think was one of the first people I've met who did not like Hamilton and had reasonable reasons for it. Just said it didn't. The abbreviation and summarization of a lot of the historical facts they felt were not
conducive to telling a meaningful story. About
yeah,
history.
kind of brushed over things. They thought it could have been done better.
I think one of the things that makes stuff not age well, and I think comedies most of all, is that the more they speak to a time, the more they're speaking to that time. So all art is a conversation. You're writing the things that you write in response to the things that you've read in some way, always. And so the stuff that hits big is hitting big because it's responding in some way to something else that hit big. You get 8 years out from that moment, you don't have the same tensions and pressures. Like, especially comedy. Comedy's about, to me, it's about you laugh to signal an in-group with the people around you, which could be euphoric in a theater where you're like, when everybody's laughing at the same thing, we're all on the same side, right? But you're also laughing to relieve a sense of social pressure of some kind or another. Like
There is a discomfort that you're acknowledging by laughing about it.
right, but it's also signaling this discomfort doesn't matter. Like you remember that thing where they were talking about how apes laugh and when apes laugh? And they're like they laugh when they're playing and it looks like danger playing, and so like they're being tickled and tickling. They were studying tickling because apes are ticklish, and they're like tickling is like a way to signal play is happening, even though I'm reacting, even though this looks like danger, it's not danger, right? And I kind of feel like all laughter is a little bit that. It's taking something that feels a little bit dangerous and saying, this isn't danger, which is also why laughter can be used as a weapon, because for people who it is a danger. That's not funny. Like, you're telling everyone this thing that's dangerous to you isn't a danger. We can laugh at it. And for someone who is wrestling with that as a danger, a real danger in their lives at that time, it's hostile.
And like one of like those sort of classic things that you see in film is somebody laughing after saying something that a regular person would consider upsetting, and like that's a sort of, you know, signal to the audience of like, oh, this is somebody with a not okay brain, because like that's not something that should make you laugh. That's something that should make you like recoil, or, you know, whatever negative reaction you're anticipating. And to just sort of overwrite it with like, haha, no, it's okay. It's like, oh, it's really not though.
If I may drive this a little bit towards literature, what are some classic novels that are comedic that have held up over time? I mean, I'm thinking of Voltaire, but are there other ones? And if so, thoughts on why?
I mean, I think P.G. Wodehouse holds up, and that's, I think, because a lot of the humor in those books comes from punching up at the upper class and the idle rich, where the main characters of, especially like I'm thinking of the Jeeves and Wooster books, but a lot of the other ones are those are the most famous. But Bertie Wooster is, I feel like he would be dead if left to his own devices in like a couple years. And Jeeves, who is nominally the servant, is the one who is smarter, better, and manages his life. And I think the humor coming from, haha, rich people are dumb, has persisted in being relevant.
Gosh, I don't know if it's possible to read Fletch not as a product of its time, but I feel like taking that into account, that's got like the sort of dark comedy edge that I think, just based on its own context, probably still works. It's been long enough since I've read it that if anyone's read it more recently and vehemently disagrees, let us know in the comments.
I like that. I like that book a lot. It is darker than the movie for sure.
Yeah,
but I imagine it would hold up. I think I would call it a funny thriller rather than just a straight up comedy.
Yeah, it is comedic.
Yeah,
but it's the narrative itself is taking itself seriously.
I don't want to be like, okay, so what I'm going to say next might sound pretentious, but I was just assigned this, read this in college. I'm not a connoisseur of Russian literature, but they assigned to read us Gogol, and I was surprised at how funny that was, especially considering, you know, the era in which he was writing, which was, you know, war and economic depression and the total clampdown of society, you know, and he found humor in the absurdity of it, and I think it stands up now.
Was there? I remember a story called The Overcoat, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure that's him.
Okay,
Yeah.
I know that's him. But was there one where someone like loses an ear? I vaguely remember an ear thing
Nose?
from a Gogol. Oh, the nose. That
Nose,
was it. Yeah. I also have read that and enjoyed it. It's been way too long for me to say anything about it other than I also remember finding it pretty funny.
Mm-hmm. People say Vonnegut is funny, like, but I do not like. I don't laugh at those books at all. Like, there's absurdist humor in it, but it's just there's this constant undercurrent of deep sadness that I can't stop feeling. So I can't really laugh at it most of the time.
So
laugh at the bleakness. Like, no, I'm good.
So there was. I'm going to dovetail a little bit because there was a question that was in the Sofawolf Academy, and this one individual was talking about, you know, wanting to write comedy and having a real challenge writing comedy, and I think this is a nice kind of conversation about comedy is hard. But that being said, you all have written comedic things in your stories. I've read some pretty funny stuff. How do you approach writing comedy in your stories?
Gosh, I mean, I'm sure I've said on this podcast and in panels over and over again that comedy is arguably the hardest thing to write. It's difficult to be funny.
I think it's the hardest thing for me specifically.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's the hardest for everyone because I've encountered people who were gifted at writing funny
Yeah.
stuff.
And if you have a knack for comedy, by all means, use it. It's great. It is a satire and humor and sort of like creating things that we can collectively laugh at in a way that shows us that it's all okay. That does have a talent. That is a gift. For me, when I'm trying to be funny, I'm a big fan of wordplay personally. I'm really big into both British and Japanese humor, which are both heavily wordplay based. And English wordplay requires effort. Like rhymes and double meanings and stuff are abound in a way where they aren't in other languages. Like there's a lot of Japanese wordplay humor that just doesn't translate, and I'm like, I can't tell you why this is funny other than they said a word that sounded like another word, and to a Japanese person, that's hilarious here, and you just need to accept that that's the joke, laugh at it, and move on. So yeah, like just kind of to me, it's all about like, does this make me chuckle when I write it? Then like somebody out there will be able to tell that this is a joke, right? Like I can't be the only one who thinks this is funny. Is kind of how I go through it. There's actually a great quote from a behind the scenes like interview with the folks behind Mystery Science Theater 3000, and somebody had asked like, do you ever worry that not enough people are going to get your jokes? And they say, no, we worry about whether the right people will get the jokes. And that's I think one of the best pieces on writing comedy I've ever come across personally.
Know your audience.
Yeah, exactly.
For my part, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna say I don't really have anything to add. Like I don't comedy is also the most difficult to write for me. So I just stick with what makes me giggle and then hope that it does for other people too.
I was trying to think about it. I may have written short stories that were intended to be comedic, but by and large, where there's comedy in my work, it's more from characters trying to be funny within the story to other characters. Because a lot of the time, that's how I think and process things in the real world. If there's a joke to be made of it, or what if I could remind other people of this thing while talking about this thing? And I was always, when I had a tech job, I had to keep myself quiet in meetings because my impulse would be to derail meetings with a comment to try to make people laugh.
Oh my God, I did that too.
And
It was not appreciated.
yeah, it's not appreciated. I mean, people laugh at it. It's appreciated in very, very small doses, but not after that. So, but that is the easiest way for me to write comedy is if I'm in a scenario or if I'm thinking through a conversation in one of my stories and I think, oh, this would be a funny thing for someone to say there. And then I'm like, oh, that person could say that thing. And then there's comedy. But it's much harder for me to come up with a premise that's going to make people laugh or a situation or an occurrence. I talked about P.G. Wodehouse, and there was a story of his that I was reading, and I can't remember which one of the Jeeves books it is, but it's basically a farce. And things had built up to the point where he ends a chapter with all of these things coming together in a ridiculous way, and it made me laugh out loud. And Kit was there, and he said, "Oh, what are you reading? What's funny?" And I said, I can't explain this to you.
You had to read there.
It's in a short fashion because it was literally 5 chapters of the book all just coming together in one at one point. I feel like that's magic.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Not just for jokes, but for any moment in fiction. If you can make a whole bunch of things come together at once, that's really difficult, but so satisfying when it works.
All right.
Should we move on to questions?
Yeah, I mean, that was awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. Comedy's hard, but it is possible. All right, so we have 2 questions from 006. We'll read those and do some new answers, or cover old answers.
All right. Our first question came 15 years ago
From 006.
from Foos Q Fuzzlemeyer Van Ball, a.k.a. Foosball, a.k.a. Malcolm Cross, author of Dog Country, Mouse Cage, Dangerous Jade,
I was going to say, yeah, Dangerous.
and some short stories that I am not thinking of at the moment, but hopefully he'll forgive me for that. He wrote a lot about in tongue-in-cheek, about the unwiseness of dispensing writing advice to people who were going to come along and supplant us on the shelves in 10 or 15 years. But
It hasn't happened.
his actual question
Wow.
is the tendency for an author to read their own work and hate it. Is this simply the author recognizing that they can do better, or are we naturally hateful of all we write? Are those few works that we have written but we still love to be counted among our masterpieces?
I was very flippant when I originally answered this. Well, maybe I wasn't. I did make the point that, and this is one of the things that's always fascinated me about my relationship with my writing and my audience, is that a lot of my favorite pieces are ones that seem to miss the audience response. And there are stories that I put out there that I didn't think were particularly that well done that a lot of people really liked. Which I guess is just a long way of saying that something that every writer experiences if you put enough stuff out there, is that it's hard to know what's going to land and what isn't. But as for the core question of is it natural to hate everything that you do? I think self-effacingness is something of a Western virtue, especially to put forth. I think that being a creator and announcing yourself as a creator is one of those things that comes across as a somewhat egotistical act, and so there's a desire to pull back on that, because but I hate the stuff I create, so you can now relate to me, haha. And that's something that I think in internet culture has only gotten stronger over the years, right? Where there's this sort of thing where putting yourself down as a means of being accepted is just that just feels like one of those online Western virtues nowadays. And I think that when it comes to creative types, especially, that hasn't really changed. That's been a thing that I think writers and creators have dealt with for a long time. And I think I see a lot of people, a lot of humor is very self-effacing, for sure, to get back to the earlier discussion there. But as to the thing where it's just are we just sitting and hate all our stuff? Honestly, not really. There's a lot of stuff that I've written that I go back and read, and I'm like, oh shoot, did I write that? I have a really huge distance from a lot of what I've written. I know that I have stories out there right now that if I read them now, it's this is something I wrote 16, 17 years ago. I legitimately don't remember anything about what I was thinking when I wrote it or what person I was when I wrote it. And so I'm essentially reading it for the first time with friends. I'm surprised when I read my own stories. I don't remember how they end when I'm reading them. It's like, that's one of those things where I'm just like, wait, what did I do with this story? I honestly don't remember. I get that a lot. And it's not just because I have a trash memory, although I do.
You have a very good memory for specific things, I found.
I have a memory for like things and facts, but things that have happened and remembering things
you
that
can identify any Star Wars alien on site.
Oh gosh, I'm really good at that. I was just thinking the other day because there was a a little clip, like a parody clip that somebody had made out of footage of the Acolyte. And I'm like, oh yeah, the bartender, that's an Ishi Tib. That's like what alien species he is. And it's just like, nobody gives a shit. Nobody in the audience needed to know that, but I knew it.
I think you're also much better than I am at remembering exact quotes from shows and books. And
oh yeah, I'm really big on wording. I don't know why. I hate like
let's see if we can unpuzzle that mystery.
Yeah, let's unpuzzle that.
We'll never get to the bottom of it.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts on writers hating their own work?
I was looking back over the way I answered the question the last time, and like I don't disagree with the things that I said before. So then I was like, well, what would I add in the 15 years since I said that? Like, what would have changed? And I would say what's changed is that I have books that I have written, stories that I've written that I love. And it's not that I don't see places where I could have fixed them, and it's not that I don't mourn missed opportunities sometimes with those. But for the most part, I love the characters in them. Like, I spent time with these characters. They feel like real people to me, and I love them. So I love the books that they're in. And I guess, you know, if you write what you love, you'll love what you write.
I have this one friend who keeps telling me that he wants to read Summerhill, and I'm like, please read it and tell me what you think about it. You're one of the last people on the planet whose opinion on this book would actually matter to me. Like, stop talking about wanting to read it and just read it so we can talk about it. I would really like to do that. If you're out there listening to this podcast, just read the fucking book already.
Yeah, I also went back to see what I had answered, and I stand by that also. Hate is a really strong word to talk about your work, and I won't put out a book or a story for publication if I don't like it. There are definitely stories I've written that have aged just from a craft standpoint. I can do better now, and reading them feels like reading amateur fiction from someone who has potential but still needs to do some work, which, when I already know the story, is a little bit tiresome, especially when it's me, and I think, oh, I could be doing that story better now. One of the reasons that the first Argaea trilogy is not out as an audiobook, or that I have not pursued that more diligently, is because it would require me to listen to somebody saying every single word of those early books, which would make me cringe a little bit.
Maybe you could remaster it.
I could write a new edition, but I did actually for Vol, because I wrote it as a stage play.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I took out a lot of the inefficiencies and things that bothered me. It ended up being extremely impractical to perform at all because the main character is on stage every single minute of the play, which is not practical.
And plus, like, you know, then also lots of people are not going to get to see it. So have you ever thought about writing a novelization of your play?
I could write a novelization of the play adaptation of the novel. There is interestingly for me, and I think I've talked about this before, there's a dividing line between work where I have that feeling about it and work that I can go back and read and not think too much about how much better it could be. And the dividing line is, this just amuses me, is right in the middle of Bridges. because the first 3 stories of Bridges were written a year before the other stories, and they were originally going to be put together in some kind of short form, and then I thought, well, I guess I could add to this, but somewhere in there, I stopped using the word tailhole, among other things, but just the prose and the craft seems to get tighter and better in the latter 3 stories than it was in the first 3. And I always think of that as sort of the demarcation of work that I'm comfortable going back and reading as opposed to not. But
That is really ironic.
no.
Don't you think?
I thought it was ironic that it was the Bridges that was the one that...
It's fitting, maybe.
Okay. Ironically fitting.
Do you have a? If not, I'll do this in the show notes. But how many years between Vol and Bridges? I'm trying to get a feel for you as an author. How many years it was before you got to that point where you're like comfortable with?
It's easier for me to say between Vol and Waterways, because Waterways was really the first full book where I was comfortable with it. So Vol was 2005, Waterways was 2008, so like 3 years.
Okay,
Wow, that's pretty
and that was pretty much solid writing at that point. You were
Right.
You were doing
I
a lot
mean,
of writing.
But also, I'd been writing for 10 years before Vol was published, so there's
By
that
the time
too.
we were working on Waterways was at the point where like I was now friends with you and like we knew each other and I got to
That's
workshop
the secret ingredient.
We've always been friends.
Oh, Ricky, you're everyone's magic feather.
All right, so inspiration for all the new authors out there. In only 10 years, you will be comfortable with the work you create.
Also, for those of you who are just newly discovering any of the 3 of us through the show, I really do care what people think about Summerhill. You don't have to not tell me just because I said there's only one person on the planet who's look. You have to understand this. This was like again over 10 years ago from where I am now. I have weird feelings about that book. That's my problem, not yours. Read it, enjoy it, love it. Tell me what you think about it. I'd be happy to hear it.
And then, okay, I'm going to do a podcast where it's just us discussing Summerhill because I recently just finished it, and so many questions, good questions. All right,
Speaking of questions,
yes,
our second question was from Wu Wei, another one of those names that if you're going to be re-experiencing the Unsheathed journey with us, you'll get used to. Also, foosball. I think this was the first foosball mention that we had as well.
This was the first foos question, at least.
So Wu Wei talks about Kurt Vonnegut and the difference between bashers and swoopers as 2 different types of writing creatives. To sum it up, because we go into more detail in the episode itself, basically you have your swoopers who just come in, dash something off, and then you do it, and whether it works or not, there you go, you're done, you did it. And then your bashers are your people who really hammer a story out into shape until it's like something that they're proud of, and then they move on. And so the question itself is, I'd like to ask what your thoughts are. Do you think that this distinction between bashers and swoopers makes sense? How do you approach revision, and what do you see as possible advantages or disadvantages of bashing and swooping?
I think when I first heard this question, I mistakenly mapped it to pantsers and plotters in my head. And I don't think that's what he's talking about.
No.
He's talking about the actual craft of writing, where I think I lean towards the swooper side, maybe. I said I lean towards the basher side, but that's because I plan out things ahead of time. But I really do just try to forge my way through a draft.
I definitely feel that I definitely do the swoopage as well. Like I talk about like this, I have a bunch of stories I wrote that I don't remember because they came and went and then they left my brain and I never read them again. And like I just don't remember them. And if until I go back and read them, you could like people ask me questions about certain stories of mine all the time, and I'm like, I don't remember that story that you're referencing or anything about it. I'm so sorry. And like that's just how my brain is with my creations.
I do think that the advantages to that, the disadvantage, that might be one disadvantage is that it doesn't stick in your head as
Yeah.
easily. But I think one of the advantages for me is that it lets me follow characters through a story.
Yeah.
It lets me sort of get into their heads and just see where the story's going to go, as opposed to
Yeah.
meticulously crafting every
I try
sentence.
to live through the
which is-
moment that I'm writing.
which is
when I
really
do that.
difficult
Yeah.
for me to do because I get bored with crafting each sentence.
Look, okay, there are people who create false dichotomies, people who don't, and me. I don't believe that either one of those really exists. Like, you may tend toward more one than the other, but are you really telling me that if you had your, if you had your plan and you were working your way through your plan and a neat idea that you hadn't thought of came up while you're working on it, you're not going to take it, you're not going to write it, you're not going to play with it?
I spent
You have a separate file where you write down the neat idea and then you work it into the draft later.
You're still doing it, and vice versa. Like if you're going at it and your neat idea is for way later in the plot, you telling me that doesn't go into an outline slot at some point in your head? Like at some point, I got to come back to this because this will pay off.
But I think this isn't about so much about like coming up with new ideas. It's about, do you write a sentence and then go on to the next one, or do you write a sentence and then go back and craft the sentence and then fix the sentence and then make sure that sentence is perfect and then go on to the next sentence?
I'm thinking of this
Oh,
on an even higher level. I'm thinking of this on like the per work level, where it's just like, do you write a story that comes to you, like throw the draft down onto paper, make some tweaks, and move on, or do you like really like hone each and every piece that comes out of your brain? Because like I was talking about how like a lot of what I've written in short story senses have just been stuff that have just come and gone. But then you also have stuff like Summerhill, where I spent like 3 to 4 years just like overworking that piece, like from the beginning. It's like, no, I got to do it again. I have to start over. Like this needs to be right.
So
And
kind of the two poles that I see are like, then if you're talking about that way is
Yeah.
like if you're more of a stylistic writer or if you're more of a storyteller, I guess. Like
Right.
how important are the actual words in the sentence as you go along to you? And I think it'd be really, really hard to be a stylistic writer where you're writing just like part of it is the love of the language, the craft of the sentence, metaphor, the scene that you're building evocatively. I can't imagine like writing like that really fast, going through, okay, I'm going to want some pretty words here about this thing, and I'll figure out what they are later once I get to the, you're gonna be doing that sentence by sentence because that's what you're interested in, right?
Right.
Whereas if what you're really more interested in is the character movements and the story that you're telling, it might be hard to slow down.
Right. And I think that's the distinction. There are definitely people who write faster first drafts and slower first drafts, and the slower ones are, I think, because they're more bashing at the sentences to make them work. I do go through and do some of that. I will go back and look at a paragraph I've just written and say, oh, wait, that's not clear. Let me go back. Or I'll have an idea 5 minutes later and I'll go back and fix something.
Yeah,
but I don't
of course.
generally linger one sentence at a time and go through. And I think the way that you're describing it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I would say too, like it's not the same for everything. Like a lot of times, dialogue line is much more important than a description. So I if I don't work on that dialogue, if I don't think about the 3 different ways this character could say it and the 3 different what they might be feeling at the time, I'm really not going to think about it in an editing pass, right? I'm gonna because then I will have forgotten my intention. I won't be able to like anchor myself in that character's perspective as thoroughly as I was when I was writing it, which is why it's always hard to pick it up again the next day, right?
Yeah, I think I don't mind it that much because I feel like if I'm going back and revising, I don't need to remember what my original intention was. I need to be thinking about what is going to work in my mindset right there as I'm going through it.
Sure. But that's what I'm saying is that when you're going back and revising, you're trusting your original intention at that point, which makes it much harder to make kind of the deeper changes that you might need to make when you're writing it in that moment.
Right.
We've also got new
All right.
questions.
So those are the old questions.
New
Thanks.
questions.
Yeah.
I would like to. We do have 2 new questions. I kind of want to do a bit of a lightning round on these guys. So
sure.
about 10 minutes, 5 minutes each,
Sure.
and then we'll go from there.
Point at us and we have to say something about the question. Wait. Who's reading it?
Any volunteers? I'll read the first one.
All right.
Yeah, let's do it.
This is from Cassius Alexander. Here's a question relating to something I'm currently struggling with as I prepare to submit some of my work. When do you decide to stop editing?
It never. You will go. You will want to fuck with your own words until the end of time if people let you.
I have a sort of like theory of diminishing returns with editing
Yeah.
where I will keep doing revisions until the last revision I've made resulted in very, very minor changes and it feels like the draft is solid and there's nothing more that I want to do with it.
I do several. I have just a set number of revisions that I do. So I do once through reading it to myself. I do once through reading it aloud to David, which he very kindly tolerates for me. And that catches most of the spoken like grammar things that you might notice or saying the wrong character's name.
Yeah.
And I'll do like a dialogue pass and like a plot flow pass. Like look for stuff that I want to take out. So 3 to 4 passes, and then I'm usually done.
What's a dialogue pass? What do you mean by that?
Oh, just like, for example, making sure that every character sounds like themselves, and what they're saying actually fits in the flow of the story or matches their motivation in a way that. Well, a big problem that I have is characters openly stating their emotions, which no person ever actually does. So you want to avoid that.
I'm amused that you said that.
One of the things that I my secret backup skill to make sure that characters sound like themselves is the fact that I am a media translator. And one of the big things that you need to do there when you're writing dialogue that's already been written in one language and the other is making sure that that character sounds like what they're supposed to. And having a knack for that translates right over into generating dialogue into English for me. Because in both cases, I know what the character is supposed to be saying. What's the best way for them to be saying that in English? And like, it turns out that at least in my brain, those are the same process. It's just like, okay, here's a thought that needs to be conveyed. What is the natural way for this character to be saying that? Gosh, if that was a skill I could teach other people, I would love to be able to. It's something that I've been told I have a knack for. I've gotten like good character writing gigs and stuff in the past over that. And also, another thing for, and I realize he's just asking about editing, but if you want help with dialogue, take a screenwriting course. It really helps.
I think Brian brings up a good point when talking about a dialogue pass, because I will often do editing passes for specific things. So not just dialogue, but I've done a tone pass to make sure that all the parts of the book have the right tone. That's especially the case with something like the Dangerous Spirits books, where I want them to have a very specific tone throughout.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. I should do that.
Yeah, I don't know if
And-
I've ever specifically done a tone pass. It's definitely a thing I look for when I'm editing. Like if something sounds out of tone, I'll certainly change it. But that is a like you
Because
just
some of
said.
the most awkward moments when I
Yeah.
look back at it was like it just doesn't fit the moment for some reason.
Right. But the
Yeah.
point is that you think of specific things you want to do revision passes for. So there could be a dialogue, a tone pass. There could be a pass for a specific character. If I feel like I don't have a handle on a particular character in a book, I will do a pass just for that character to go through.
Yeah.
And there could also be, I usually do passes for description and setting because those are things that I often leave out of first drafts. And so I want to make sure that I'm getting them right. And so if you identify all these things that you want to go through and make sure you address, then when you're done with all that, you're close to stopping editing.
Just make it structured.
Yeah.
You can't really pants editing.
I
Right.
have a I'm working on something now, which is a humor piece, and a lot of the stuff in the very first scene, there's a lot of jokes that I already know I need to go back and change because it's not that the jokes aren't in the right place. It's just as the piece's sense of humor has shaken out, the more I've written into it, there's just a bunch of jokes that just don't land with the piece's sense of humor anymore. And so I know I need to alter those.
Okay. So then
Yeah.
I'm going to just summarize real quick. That was really helpful, and I think I learned there as well. Is like go into editing with a purpose.
Yeah.
Know what you're
know
doing.
your piece, know what you want. Yeah.
Know the types of passes you want to do.
Yeah.
Do those passes, and then let it go.
Yep.
You will have to stop at some point. You can't continue.
You'll
Deadlines help, but
you'll improve much more writing your next book than you will fixing the last one.
You get better at knowing when you've reached the end of your editing. The longer you write, the better you get at knowing I've done what I can to this. I need to move on.
And for me, the last pass is always a proofreading pass, which is the read aloud that Ryan was talking about, because then I'm not usually, I've added all the new words and scenes and things that I'm going to add, so I can focus on making sure that they all make sense.
Oh man, the worst is when you change something that happens to a character later on, and you're like, or just at a different point in the book, and you're like, did anything reference the thing that I just changed?
Oh,
I
yeah.
guess I have to read the whole thing again.
And
Be
it-
sick of that book by the time you're done with it.
early copies of Divisions went out with a sentence that I'd hurriedly inserted at the last minute and didn't proofread, and had like 3 typos in it.
Oh no.
Killed me.
it'll happen.
Killed me.
Yeah.
Mistakes will happen. So allow yourself to forgive yourself as well. All right, let's go to the last question. This is from Jay Wolf. Since I'm writing my first attempt at a book, is it normal or have you heard of someone writing it as a human story first with the intent of translating it to a furry world later?
So the first thing that I want to say about this is do not worry about what is normal.
Right.
Yeah.
Worry about what is going to work for you.
Yeah.
All writing advice is bad advice if it doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I feel like if you want to write a story in a furry world, write the story in a furry world. Like there's no rules to this. There's like the writing police aren't going to kick down your door because you wrote about furries. Like if you ultimately want this to be about furries, I would just start doing that now. And like maybe you didn't start this as a furry draft, but like make it furry now. Like if you already know that's where you're going to go, don't waste time writing stuff that's not going to line up with what you want it to be in the end. You're just wasting words and energy.
I'm going somewhere with this. I last weekend I think rewatched Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and I loved that movie when it came out. And while I still love the character work and the writing in it, one thing that really stood out to me was that characters never interacted with anything in their environments, and often not with each other, since they were, very
Welcome
little
to modern filmmaking.
very
Yeah.
little was real. I think they were probably filming in the Volume, which is this big stage that's made up of like LEDs, OLED screens or whatever, like super high tech that they can just create the world around them and they run through it. And it freaking looked like that. Like going back and looking at it, they don't seem like they're in their environment. And I would say if you try to change up stories this way, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to be green screening your characters, and they won't feel like they belong there. I think it's even, for me, it's kind of inconceivable because our environments define us and affect us so much, and we do the same in return. So I don't know. I feel like, if this is an early story and this is just something that's going to help you in the early steps for writing that story, awesome. That sounds great. Go ahead with it. But be thinking while you're doing that about the opportunities that you might be missing by making your furry characters hot swappable into any kind of world that you might come up with.
It really stands out when that's what the intent is, to be able to have this. Like, I have read novels that people have written, and it's like, oh, this clearly started as a fanfic of somebody's like Star Wars tabletop role-playing game, and now you've had to hot swap all of the legal Star Wars stuff out for other things, and like all the reader can think of is, this is supposed to be Star Wars. Like, you can tell when you've changed things from what they were originally supposed to be.
I know that writing furry characters and writing humans feels different to me. There isn't a case where when I'm writing a human, I think, oh, did their ears flick? I just don't have that instinct for some reason, for whatever reason, because in my head, they're a different kind of character. I think the thing that's missing from this question for me is why you want to write it as a human story first.
Yeah.
And I can think of a couple reasons, possible reasons, but ultimately, if you're more comfortable writing a human story first and then trying to change it into a furry story, go ahead and do that. I would not do that. It feels like a ton of extra work.
It feels counterintuitive to me.
As both of these people have said, it's a lot of extra work, and whenever you do that kind of change, you're not just writing the story and then editing the story, you're also editing and then having to spackle over all of the changes that you've made and hope that it still appears as smooth as if it had been that story from the beginning, which is a thing you have to do when you're editing anyway. But why give
you're
yourself
already
one
going
more
to
thing?
be redrafting this and rewriting it. Like, just go for it. If you if you know, aim for where you're shooting for now.
Right. I think ultimately what I'm saying is, if you have a really good reason for trying to write it as a human story first, and you're asking for permission to do that, go ahead. Do it. You don't have to answer to anyone. Do whatever makes you feel comfortable.
The furry fun police will not kick down your door for doing it wrong.
If you don't have a good reason and you're just saying, this seems like an interesting idea, have you heard of people doing that? My recommendation would be not, but,
I have not heard of people doing that, for what it's worth.
Yeah, do what you need to do to get the book done.
I think the follow-up question I have is, what do you define as a furry world? Because it sounds like by the way you guys are answering it, you're kind of, there's a clear delimitation between a human and a furry world, and I'm not as sure I understand what that delimitation is. So, like, if you're saying I want to write a furry world,
of
what does it
anthropomorphic
make?
animal people taken for granted, or is it special and unique, and therefore that's why it's the focus of the story? I think that's where I would put the delineation.
My read from the question was that the characters were all going to be human in the first draft, and then they were going to make them all furry later.
That's how I interpreted it as well.
So when you write furry characters, what is it about them that makes you want to write a furry character as opposed to a human character? Because a lot of the plots in storylines you guys do are human stories, right?
Yeah.
But you tell it with a furry.
I guess
Everything's a human story. that we tell.
Yeah, to me, characters, if I'm writing, because I like to write about furry characters, and they'll just kind of come to me as whatever species I happen to imagine them as, unless there's like a story that I want to write about a certain species because I have an idea that I think would fit a certain species. But otherwise, it's just like the creative part of my brain likes to assign animal species to characters, and that's how the characters come to me, like, most of the time. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I should figure out like what species this bartender is, but like I will get a vision of a scene of like, here's my main character talking to the bartender. And in my head, I'll be like, the bartender's a rabbit. And now the bartender's a rabbit. And I will write him as a rabbit and do rabbit things with him. But it's just like, why is he a rabbit? I don't know. That's what my brain told him to be.
Yeah, I don't think I do those kinds of stories too much. Like my characters, if they're furries, they're integrated into the world in some pivotal way. So if you're talking about the fire bearers, then the furries are the gods, and they define the world, and the world defines them, as you know if you've read it. But then if you're talking about
You should read them, by the way.
if you're talking about Koa, then their species can define everything from personal opportunities and abilities, the kind of jobs they can get, to the social class that they have. It's your physicality shapes you and shapes how you interact with the world, and that's part of the interesting part of furries for me.
Okay.
I have so many answers to this question. This feels like the oldest question in furry writing, but
why anthropomorphic animal?
I'm not going to go through everything here. I think at the foundation it comes down to I like furries and I want to write stories about them.
I'm glad you do.
You heard it here, folks. That's Kyell Gold's sinister MO. Local fox wants to write about foxes. Film at 11.
Any last comments for anybody? If not,
I just wanted to say, on behalf of the otter contingent of the regular hostage on this podcast, I've been poking around the online Sofawolf Academy community myself. Recently, I finally dusted myself off and found my old otter icons and gotten back out into the fray, and it's been fun seeing people talk about the show again. It really has been taking me back. It's a fun nostalgic time, and it's great to see a lot of familiar names talking about how excited they are that we're back doing this, and I'm glad we're back doing this too. Hopefully this continues to work out, folks.
We certainly hope so. So since you have been poking around the academy, did you notice some of the folks trying to guess the initials?
I did.
And has anybody perhaps?
Nobody has gotten it yet in the new thing. I did look. Somebody guessed like 8 things for both letters, and I'm like, well, that's cheating. I can't tell you now which one of those is right, but
If any.
But yeah, no, there's
We're gonna still say this prize is unclaimed.
This prize is unclaimed as for now. But yeah, if you can give me a like coherent guess of what the K component and the M component is, and bonus if you can tell me why that's what the initials KM stand for. I don't know you'll get a better prize, but I will respect you so much more if you're not just like throwing darts at the board. If you can actually like figure it out and tell me why, because there is an answer. And I don't know. It's been over 20 years at this point. No one's guessed it so far. But
Take it to your grave.
Yeah. I'll have to write it down on a piece of paper in case I die.
I think it should just be left untranslated,
Yeah.
like the Voynich
I was going to
manuscript.
say like the Voynich manuscript. Jesus. I'm still the same nerd I was 15 years ago, folks. I have a deeper voice now.
I don't know that I have anything to. I've also been hanging around in the Sofawolf Academy. I reconnected with a writer that I knew back in the before times, which was fun. I've been working a lot on books that will be coming out sometime in the future. Dead Right, the second Wolftown book, will be out this fall. We have one advance review for it, which was very nice and made me waggy. And other than that, I'm currently working on revising Azure City, which is the new Dangerous Spirits spin-off book, which will be out next year sometime. And after that, I'm going to work on the third Wolftown book, and then I have a Robin Hood book to do and the Thai sequel to do, and so no rest
Trello board.
No rest for the wicked. Yeah, come look at my Trello board, which you can't see.
All right. In that case, this is thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Not to appreciate you showing up. Always a
Good
pleasure.
to have you back here.
Thank you.
Kid Silver signing off.
And Otter 5 standing off.
And I'm Kyell Gold. Good night.
Good night.